to a small but dedicated group of UFO researchers. This barren ranch land, 75 miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico, is sacred territory. It's the place where they believe one or more alien spaceships crashed to Earth sometime in early July 1947.
I think there was probably a mid-air collision that resulted in one going one way and exploding and dumping all the wreckage out in the debris field, the other making it down almost intact.
Today, that crash, commonly referred to as the Roswell incident, is the stuff of legend. But we might never have heard of Roswell if not for a former nuclear physicist turned UFO researcher named Stanton Friedman. After spending nearly 30 years investigating the incident, hunting down dozens of key witnesses and scores of top-secret documents, Friedman is convinced that the U.S. government is covering up a UFO crash. This is his proof. It begins in 1978, when after giving a lecture on UFOs, someone casually asks if he's ever met former military intelligence officer Jesse Marcel.
Brilliant investigator that I am, I said, "Who's he?" I never heard of him. "Oh, well, he handled pieces of the wreckage in one of those saucers you're interested in." What?
Friedman tracks down Marcel in Louisiana and first hears the fantastic tale about the day Marcel helped recover a real alien spaceship.
There were just fragments strewn all over the area, an area about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide.
So, Jesse tells me his story was in newspapers around the world, but he doesn't remember the exact date. And he tells me how they took the wreckage to Fort Worth, Texas, and he was told not to say anything.
Friedman checks with the local Roswell paper, and sure enough, there it is. July 8, 1947. Roswell Army Air Force captures flying saucer.
It was a big sensational thing. Front page headlines, not just the Roswell Daily Record, which is kind of a small paper, but in the West Coast papers, Los Angeles Herald Express, huge paper, and so forth.
But there's a follow-up story, too. One day later, a report from the U.S. military that the wreckage isn't a crashed UFO after all. It's pieces of a downed weather balloon. But now, 30 years later, here's Marcel telling Friedman the balloon story is false, part of a cover-up by the U.S. government.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was.
In the weeks leading up to the Roswell incident, the country is gripped by UFO fever after a commercial pilot reports seeing 9 strange objects flying over Washington state.
He said that they acted like saucers bobbing or skipping across the water. It was from him that the term flying saucer came from.
Hundreds of flying saucer sightings pour in, especially in New Mexico, home to top-secret test sites for V-2 rockets and atomic and nuclear weapons. The city of Roswell itself is the base of the 509th, the world's only atomic air squadron. Just 2 years earlier, it had dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
If aliens were going to be interested in anything that happened on this planet, boy, they'd make a beeline for New Mexico.
As the story goes, on that fateful night in early July 1947, a violent thunderstorm rolls through Roswell. Out in the desert, rancher Mac Brazel sleeps fitfully in his tiny cabin.
There had been a big electric storm, and he heard what he thought was an explosion that didn't sound like thunder.
The next morning, Brazel checks on his animals and notices they won't cross a pasture. He goes for a closer look and stumbles across debris littered over a large field.
And he finds this huge amount of stuff, strange material, covering an area hundreds of feet wide by almost 3/4 of a mile long.
The material is odd, lightweight, but incredibly strong. Brazel carries a few pieces to his neighbor's ranch.
Kind of a tan, light brown plastic.
Brazel mentions other debris, items covered with strange writing.
He said the writing wasn't like Japanese writing, but it was, I imagine, more like hieroglyphics or something like that.
The strangest material looks like aluminum foil, but with a weird ability to return to its original shape,
If you picked it up and folded it, it would unfold. And if you folded it several times, it would still unfold. And you couldn't tear it.
Brazel drags some of the debris to a shed. A few days later, he's on the phone with Frank Joyce, a local DJ and radio reporter.
They began to talk about things that might be out of this world. I thought maybe this is a hoax.
During the conversation, Joyce says Brazel mentions finding bodies in the wreckage.
And one thing that he mentioned on the phone was the horrible odor that was with these bodies.
Thinking Brazel might be insane, Joyce tries to end the call.
I advised him to go to the U.S. Army Air Corps because they are flyers and will know what to do about anything that flies.
Brazel does call Roswell Army Airfield. Major Jesse Marcel answers the phone. Marcel reports the call to his commanding officer, who orders him and a counterintelligence officer to go investigate.
He says, go out with him because the rancher said there's a whole mess of this stuff out there, and nothing that he brought in was conventional.
At the ranch, Marcel is also puzzled by the debris. He gathers it up and heads back to Roswell. He's so excited by the potential discovery, he stops by his home after midnight and wakes his wife and 11-year-old son, Jesse Jr.
He said something like, this is parts of what we feel is a flying saucer.
Jesse Marcel Jr. is a doctor and colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves. He just got back from Iraq. He's writing a manuscript called Roswell, It Really Happened. Even though it happened many years ago, he still vividly remembers what his father showed him that night.
I picked up the material and I noticed it had a very strange quality to it. It was very light. I didn't try to bend it or tear it, but I just kind of looked at it and just kind of wondered what this was.
Marcel's father continues on to the base to report his findings to his superiors. The next morning, the base commander orders the public information officer to write a press release about the incident.
He gave me exactly what he wanted in the press release, that we had in our possession a flying disc.
The story hits the airwaves, creating an instant sensation.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
But almost as quickly begins what appears to be a government cover-up.
From the time that story came out, I felt that someone somewhere was trying to stop every last word of this story.
News of a mysterious crashed disc puts the world's focus on Roswell, New Mexico.
This was too good to be true. We couldn't really believe a story like this, that it really was authentic.
But within hours of those first shocking reports comes a flurry of high-level military interest, strange shipments to other air bases, and fear. For people like Major Jesse Marcel, it's the beginning of a conspiracy to cover up what really happened at Roswell. Marcel is ordered to escort the wreckage, first to Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas, and then on to Wright Airfield in Ohio.
Why Wright Field? That's where captured enemy equipment normally went. Wright Air Development Center is there, and they take things apart and find out how they're made.
In Hangar 84 at Roswell Army Airfield, the wreckage is boxed up and loaded onto a B-29 airplane. Personnel report seeing a procession of people carrying boxes of strange-looking debris, and something even more ominous. Another flight, this one carrying bodies.
The bodies were taken to the hospital first. And supposedly then this is where the C-54 was brought and they loaded up. He flew from here.
At about the same time, the local undertaker in Roswell receives a strange call from the base, asking about the availability of child-sized coffins and embalming techniques for bodies left outdoors. Later, he runs into a panicked nurse at the base, who tells him she witnessed an alien autopsy.
I knew the lady quite well, and she said, look, Glenn, she was screaming, get out of here as fast as you can, because you are going to get in a lot of trouble.
She describes what she saw in detail.
The heads were very large. They were pliable like a newborn baby.
The description of the bodies is pretty consistent by anyone who claims that they have seen them. Kind of grayish to grayish green with a large head, large dark black eyes.
But it's the wreckage that would soon spark charges of a government cover-up. When Marcel and his strange cargo arrive in Texas, Brigadier General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force, is waiting to inspect the debris. The general asks Marcel to step into a nearby map room to show where it was found. When they return, the debris is gone, allegedly switched with material from what appears to be a common weather balloon.
According to Marcel in his last interview, there were some wrapped packages there. He says they hid the debris from the photographers who came in, but what was in the picture was just staged. It was just, you know, it was just the cover story.
The press snapped several photos of various officials posing with the debris, including Jesse Marcel.
He kind of looks kind of sheepish, like, you know, they're okay, guys, I'll hold it up here, but this, you know, this is not what I saw.
Years later, Stan Friedman believes he's confirmed the cover story when he gets a signed affidavit from the General's Chief of Staff, who says the weather balloon story was to divert the attention of the press. And it comes on direct orders from the Deputy Commander of Strategic Air Command in Washington, D.C.
He gave him 3 orders. I want you to send some of that wreckage here today with one of your Colonel Couriers. I want you to get the press off our backs. I don't care how you do it. And I don't want you ever to talk about it again, not even with your buddy Roger Ramey.
The alleged cover story works. Just a day after the fantastic tale broke, the media and the public buy into the new story.
People really believed in the military back then. It was right after World War II, and the military had saved us, you know, from fascism.
After the photo op, the wreckage is flown to a new unknown destination, while Marcel is ordered to return to Roswell and forget the entire incident.
When he came back and he had my mother and I kind of together, he says, you know, guys, we're not to talk about this anymore. Treat it like a non-event. Didn't happen. So may not forget about it, but don't talk about it, not even with your friends. And we didn't.
Others are also allegedly pressured to keep silent or change their stories. A few days after the photo op, rancher Mac Brazel pays a visit to Frank Joyce at the radio station.
He said, I found out after I left here that what I told you out on the ranch was not accurate. What the crash was a weather balloon.
But Joyce says he uncovers Brazel's fib when he asks what happened to the alien bodies.
I said, you know, it brings up what people are talking about recently, the stories you hear about little green men. And in a quiet voice, he said, they weren't green.
I think Brazel may very well have seen the bodies. But again, that would be another reason for putting a thumb down on it.
A few days after the photo op, rancher Mac Brazel pays a visit to Frank Joyce at the radio station.
He said, I found out after I left here that what I told you out on the ranch was not accurate. What the crash was a weather balloon.
But Joyce says he uncovers Brazel's fib when he asks what happened to the alien bodies.
I said, you know, it brings up what people are talking about recently, the stories you hear about little green men. And in a quiet voice, he said, they weren't green.
I think Brazel may very well have seen the bodies. But again, that would be another reason for putting a thumb down on it.
While Roswell investigators are able to confirm the balloon cover story, getting what they believe is confirmation of the alien bodies would take much longer.
My reaction, as I remember, as I said, here it was in black and white talking about bodies and a disc.
When they do find it, the smoking gun is in, of all places, the very hand of the man at the center of the alleged Roswell cover-up. After the debris from a crashed UFO is identified as a simple weather balloon, interest in the Roswell incident dies down and is soon forgotten altogether. But the principals in this drama, like Major Jesse Marcel, never forget.
It was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else of which we didn't know what it was.
Marcel's son remembers his father as adamant the truth was being hidden.
I remember him saying later that he was part of the cover-up because he went along with the story publicly, but privately, he didn't.
According to researcher Stanton Friedman, the U.S. military doesn't forget the incident either. Instead, Roswell becomes the launchpad for what he calls a cosmic Watergate, an ongoing government conspiracy to hide the truth about extraterrestrial UFOs.
It's clear that there were people in the government taking this seriously. It was also clear that they made a conscious attempt to cover things up.
Just a few weeks after the Roswell incident, the National Security Council is created, the president's highest level and most secret advisory group.
Obviously, UFOs would come under the aegis of the National Security Council. This is what bypassed the Constitution, the Congress, the news media, and the public. This is where the subject of UFOs went deep and dark.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
Also in 1947, the Air Force establishes what would be called Project Blue Book, a program to track all UFO sightings across the nation.
The Air Force interest in this problem is to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States.
So many sightings are reported, Friedman claims the military issues special orders in response.
Air Force pilots were being ordered in 1952, summer, to shoot down UFOs if they didn't land when instructed to do so. And we have General Roger Ramey, by this time a major general and a primary actor in the Roswell story, saying we scrambled jets hundreds of times after saucers.
The Air Force investigates more than 12,000 sightings over 22 years. To this day, 700 remain unexplained. But to Roswell's true believers, the real purpose of Project Blue Book isn't to find UFOs. It's to debunk the very notion of them.
We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, erroneously identified friendly aircraft, meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations.
Everything that was reported could somehow be explained as the planet Venus, unidentified aircraft, satellites, or swamp gas. Anything they could come up with.
Project Blue Book is shelved in 1969 after the Air Force decides UFOs pose no threat to national security. But according to Jim Mars, the government didn't stop researching them.
There have been literally dozens of documents pried out of the CIA, out of the military, and others that show that behind the scenes there is an intense interest in what these things are, where they come from, and what they're up to.
Over the years, Roswell researchers say they've petitioned the government to release whatever information it has, with little success.
We went after the CIA. We want all your UFO stuff. We don't have any UFO stuff. You do too. You do not. We argue. We go to court. The judge says do a search. They come back. Oh, gee, we found 900 pages of UFO materials. They said they had none.
Even when documents are released, such as this affidavit from the National Security Agency, They're often highly censored.
Eventually we got it. The only trouble is it's about 80% blacked out.
But why would the government hide what it knows about UFOs, and especially the Roswell incident? Friedman believes it's because the alien bodies are hidden away in secret government laboratories, and the wreckage is being studied for scientific advancements. For proof, he points to the revolutionary aircraft developed in the past 6 decades.
Here's our fastest manned craft, the Apollo Command Module. And it looks like a flying saucer.
Secret laboratories, engineering wonders. It seems unbelievable, unless you believe there really was an alien crash landing in Roswell. David Rudiak says he has proof of that. It's this 1947 photograph.
This is one of 7 photos known to have been taken in the office of General Roger Ramey.
The photograph is from the day the U.S. military identified the Roswell debris as nothing more than a weather balloon. In it, Ramey is kneeling beside the debris, clutching a piece of paper. Seems pretty unremarkable, until you look closer.
The real prize is what Ramey is holding in his hand right here. And you can see as you zoom in that there's writing on this paper.
Using a digital photo scanner to enlarge and enhance the document, Rudiak says he can make out the words that prove there was an alien spacecraft.
This was a brand new use of the word disk. The flying saucers or flying disks, and the terminology had been around for less than 2 weeks, and so the newspapers, for example, often enclose the word disk in quotes.
Then, in the same paragraph, a shocker.
The real key to this message is this word right here, which the initial group identified as being the word victims.
Rudiak deciphers more of the paragraph.
They had the victims, they were going to ship them, I believe, to the chief medical officer at Fort Worth.
And when it's all strung together, Rudiak believes the document is nothing short of a bombshell.
They'd found a disc, they'd found victims, they were shipping the victims out, and then they were going to cover it up.
So is it all really true? The debris, the victims, the cover-up. Is this the long-awaited proof that an alien spacecraft did crash outside Roswell? The U.S. government has looked at the same evidence and come to a much different conclusion.
Doesn't sound very classified to me. You don't let highly classified things just float down in the desert where your enemies, spies, can look at them.
And the basic materials used in Mogul, like paper-backed foil, would never be confused for an alien spacecraft.
You can go down to the grocery store and buy a Hershey bar, and what it's wrapped in is the exact same material that the radar targets are made from. So nobody would have been mystified by this.
And then there are the famous photographs. Jesse Marcel Jr. insists the material in the picture is not what he saw.
It was not the same. It's not at all.
Roswell researchers say there's one explanation. The government switched the debris. And they believe there have been other suspicious doings as well. Jim Mars points to this 1995 GAO report.
They came up with no document stating that it was a saucer or they were aliens, but what they did find was that all of the communication records in and out of Roswell between 47 and 48 had all been somehow misplaced or destroyed.
In 1997, the Air Force releases yet another report, this one called Roswell, Case Closed. Air Force officials hope this will explain once and for all any doubts about alien bodies.
Bodies observed in the New Mexico desert were probably test dummies that were carried aloft by U.S. Air Force high-altitude balloons for scientific research.
But there's a problem with this explanation. Air Force records show that test dummies weren't used until 1953, 6 years after the crash at Roswell.
Colonel, how do you square the UFO enthusiasts saying that they're talking about 1947, but you're talking about dummies used in the 50s, almost a decade later?
Well, I'm afraid that's a problem that we have with time compression. I don't know what they saw in 47, but I think over a period of time they began to lose exactly when the date was. And there were lots of dummies dropping.
Well, obviously not all the dummies crashed at Roswell.
So is it really case closed when it comes to Roswell and UFOs?
You're coming. I again called a friend of mine who was a Navy doctor during the same time period we're talking about. Slightly after that, and he all of a sudden was healing a pilot, a person who's been pilot. And he began to tell him a story, and he basically said, one day I was up in one of the faster airplanes that we had, and I had something that was a spherical object that was ahead of me. And I called back and I said, are there any friendlies over here? He actually took off from a Texas location, headed off that way, and
towards New Mexico.
And he said, they said, well, no, there's no friendlies here. He said, not only that, but he's accelerating away from me, and yet I have the fastest airplane that's been designed. And
at that time was...
And therefore it can't be one of us.
Well, that was...
And he said, well, they said, well, you have the you have the weapon on board. It was a new design.
Oh.
And he said, go on ahead and shoot it down. And so he did.
He shot down the Roswell craft. Do you know who did it?
He said, don't give the people my name, nor give
you
them,
know this
nor
man?
give, no, he certainly.
He shot it down.
He's a very dear,
What kind of a weapon?
The doctor is a very dear friend of mine.
What kind of a weapon?
I don't know. We have all kinds
Because
of...
bullets were only 1,500 miles an hour back then.
We have...
Magnetic pulse.
Anyhow.
Nikola Tesla